The night was unnaturally still, as though the desert itself held its breath. A faint orange glow from scattered campfires flickered against the jagged canyon walls, throwing long shadows that danced like restless spirits. Inside the Apache encampment, a circle of men gathered around their chief, their faces painted in crimson and black, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. In the very center stood Chief Nantan, tall and fierce, his braided hair bound with eagle feathers, his chest bare beneath the chill night air. His voice, when it rose, was raw thunder. "This night," he declared, pounding the butt of his spear into the earth, "we wager honor, we wager blood. And I," he paused, eyes narrowing into slits of fire, "I wager my wife." A hush fell over the crowd. For a heartbeat, even the wind seemed to stop. The crackle of firewood filled the silence, mingling with the sharp intake of breath from his people. At his side, a woman staggered forward, slender, with obsidian black hair cascading over her shoulders, eyes dark pools of despair. Her wrists were bound by rough leather straps, though no one could mistake the strength in her trembling form. She was the chief's wife, the pride of the tribe, and now she was reduced to a stake in a game of death. The wager was no ordinary challenge. It was a duel, a showdown with rifles at 20 paces. A fight until one man fell and the ground drank his blood. Chief Nantan had been provoked, taunted by rivals who questioned his courage, his authority, his very right to lead. To silence them, he chose the unthinkable, to put the woman he called wife into the flames of fate. The drums began, slow and steady. Boom, 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 echoing off the canyon walls. Each beat pulsed like a heartbeat, thick with foreboding. The warriors stomped their feet in unison, the earth trembling beneath them. Children clung to their mothers. Old men muttered prayers in hushed tones, as if the spirits of their ancestors might intervene. The woman lifted her chin, defiant even in despair. "You shame me, Nantan," she said in her own tongue, her voice slicing through the night like a blade. "If death is to claim me, it will not be because you gamble my soul." But her words only fueled the fire in her husband's eyes. He barked something guttural, commanding silence, and the warriors obeyed. He raised his arms to the sky as if to summon the gods of war themselves. Sparks leapt high into the air, swirling like burning insects before fading into the vast star-studded darkness. Across the camp, whispers spread like wildfire. Cruelty. But the drums drowned out doubt, and the ritual of war pressed forward. Then came the rival challenger, striding into the circle with the arrogance of a predator. He was broad-shouldered, his face scarred from a dozen battles, his rifle gleaming under the firelight. He spat into the dirt and grinned, his teeth flashing white against the dark. "So be it," he growled. "Your pride against my bullet." Chief Nantan's nostrils flared. He clutched his rifle, lifting it high, and the crowd howled in response. The wager was sealed. At dawn, blood would flow. The woman was dragged to the side, tied to a wooden post near the fire. The flames painted her face in harsh strokes of orange and red, catching in her tears. She closed her eyes, whispering prayers to gods long forgotten, prayers for mercy, for freedom, for someone, anyone, to intervene. Beyond the firelight, the desert stretched into silence. Coyotes howled in the distance, their mournful cries weaving into the drums. The night deepened, heavy with fate. And somewhere miles away, a lone rider urged his weary horse toward the canyon, unaware that destiny itself awaited him. Each hoofbeat brought him closer to a camp where honor had twisted into cruelty, where a wager of blood threatened to consume an innocent soul. He could not know yet that his path would cross with hers, nor that his defiance would ignite a story whispered for generations. For now the tribe prepared for dawn, for the crack of rifles, for the moment when Chief Nantan's pride would decide the fate of his wife. The fire burned low, shadows lengthened, and the deadly wager was set. The sun was only a pale smudge on the horizon when the cowboy rode into view, his silhouette cut sharp against the growing light. Dust clung to his duster coat, and the brim of his hat drooped low. Shading eyes hardened by too many miles and too little mercy in the land. His horse, a gray gelding scarred from countless rides through brush and canyon, moved with the tired determination of an animal that knew no rest. He had no name the locals knew, only whispers carried from one saloon to the next. A drifter, a man with a past, a man who rode toward trouble as though it were a calling. Some said he once wore a sheriff's badge. Others claimed he had killed a sheriff for the badge itself. The truth, like the desert wind, shifted and twisted until no one cared anymore. All that mattered was that when he appeared, fate followed close behind. At the base of the canyon he reined in, his horse snorting steam into the cool dawn air. His gaze swept over the Apache camp sprawled across the plateau. Rows of hide tents, smoke curling lazily upward, and the faint drumbeat that carried on the wind. His jaw clenched. Drums at dawn rarely meant peace. He nudged the gelding forward. Each hoofbeat echoed between the canyon walls, a steady rhythm that seemed to announce his presence before he wished it. A pair of young braves appeared, stepping from the shadows with spears leveled. They studied the rider with suspicion, their paint still fresh, their eyes burning with the restless courage of youth. The cowboy raised a hand in greeting, slow and deliberate. "I come to talk," he said, his voice gravelly from a night spent breathing dust. "No fight, unless one's forced." The braves exchanged glances. One spat into the dirt. The other jerked his chin toward the heart of camp. With a grunt, they allowed him through, trailing him like wolves ready to strike. As he rode deeper, the camp revealed its unease. Women drew children closer, their faces a mixture of fear and curiosity. Warriors stopped sharpening their knives, their stares sharp enough to cut. The drumbeat grew louder, faster, each strike hammering against his ribs. And then he saw her, the woman tied to the post. Her hair tangled by the wind, her cheeks streaked with dried tears, her eyes distant as though already walking the border of life and death. Even from his saddle he felt the pull of her desperation, a silent cry louder than the drums. His gut twisted. He had seen cruelty before, lynchings in frontier towns, outlaws stringing up innocents for fun, soldiers burning homesteads in the name of order. But this was different. The crowd parted reluctantly as he approached the circle where Chief Nantan stood, rifle in hand, muscles coiled like a drawn bow. The challenger loomed nearby, grinning, eager for blood. The drums ceased with a final thunderous strike, leaving only silence and the crackle of dying embers. "Who are you?" Nanton's voice cracked the air, deep and sharp as flint. "Doesn't matter," the cowboy replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I heard a man wager something no man should. I came to say it ends here." A ripple of outrage surged through the crowd. Warriors barked in their tongue, hands tightening on weapons. The challenger laughed, a coarse, ugly sound. "Ends here, stranger? You've stumbled into a fight that ain't yours." The cowboy's stare never left the woman at the post. "Any fight that sells a woman's soul," he said slowly, "belongs to every man with breath in his lungs." Gasps broke from the crowd. Nanton's face twisted with fury. He stepped closer, eyes flashing like obsidian knives. "You dare speak against me in my own ground?" The cowboy tilted his hat back, letting the morning sun catch his scarred jawline. "I dare," he said simply. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold still. The woman's eyes flickered, a glimmer of hope breaking through despair. The challenger's grin faltered, sensing that destiny had shifted with the stranger's words. Then the chief roared, raising his rifle high. The warriors shouted in unison, the camp erupting in chaos. But the cowboy did not move. He stood rooted, calm as stone, every breath measured. His hand hovered near his revolver, fingers loose, ready. The duel was no longer between chief and challenger alone. The drifter had drawn a line in the sand, one that could not be erased. And as the first rays of sun spilled across the canyon, painting the ground in blood-red light, the people knew a storm was coming. It would not be long before lead flew, before the drums of war were replaced by the thunder of gunfire. And when that moment came, the cowboy would stand in its center, the lone barrier between pride and mercy, death and salvation. By mid-morning, the canyon had filled with bodies. Apache warriors lined the ridges above like vultures waiting for death to fall. Their paint glistened under the sun, streaks of crimson and white that turned their faces into masks of fury. From the east, cavalry scouts lingered on horseback, silent silhouettes against the skyline, watching with wary eyes but unwilling to interfere. Even the townsfolk had gathered, farmers, drifters, gamblers, drawn by whispers of the wager and the promise of blood. The canyon itself seemed alive with tension. The air shimmered in the heat, carrying the scent of dust, sweat, and gun oil. Every sound was magnified. The scrape of a boot against stone, the clatter of a rifle bolt, the crack of a horse's tail swatting at flies. Somewhere a hawk circled, its cry slicing through the heavy silence. In the center, a rough ring had been cleared, a dueling ground marked by stones and scorched earth. The woman remained bound to the post at its edge, her lips parched, her eyes locked on the man who had dared to stand against her husband. The cowboy. He stood a few paces away, coat draped over his shoulders, hat pulled low. His revolver gleamed faintly in the light, the grip worn smooth from years of use. He said nothing, only watched as Chief Nanton barked orders, rallying his men, ensuring the ritual would unfold as his pride demanded. The challenger swaggered nearby, flexing his shoulders, spinning his rifle as though the duel were already won. He sneered at the cowboy, spitting into the dirt. "You should have kept riding, stranger. You'll be carrion by sundown." The cowboy's gaze slid to him, calm as still water. "We'll see." The words carried farther than they should have. bouncing from canyon wall to canyon wall, until even the watchers on the ridges heard them. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some admired the drifter's courage, others pitied his foolishness. As the sun climbed, drums began again. Not the slow, ominous thud of the night before, but a quickened rhythm that sent pulses racing, hearts hammering. The Apache warriors chanted with each beat, their voices rising in a wave that seemed to shake the earth itself. The woman flinched at every shout, her breath shallow. She tested the bonds at her wrists, the leather cutting deeper with every movement. A single thought burned in her mind: survive. Yet her eyes kept straying to the cowboy, to the stranger who had risked his life for hers, without knowing her name. The cavalry scouts shifted uneasily. One of next to see, wide-eyed, clutching ragged dolls while mothers pulled them back. The cowboy stepped closer to the dueling ring, his boots grinding against the stones. The sound silenced even the gamblers. He tipped his hat back, revealing eyes that gleamed like steel in the sunlight. "Chief," he called, voice low but steady. "This ends with me." Not her Nantan's face twisted into something between rage and astonishment. "You think you can decide what ends, Pale Rider? You come into my ground, my people, my blood, and tell me how to rule?" The drifter's jaw tightened. A man rules himself, not his woman's soul. Gasps shivered through the gathering. The woman's lips parted, a faint sound escaping. Half sob, half prayer. The challenger snarled, shoving his way forward. "Enough talk. Let's end this." The drums stopped. The sudden silence was suffocating. Dust hung in the air, shimmering in the harsh light. The canyon waited, every soul caught between breath and heartbeat. 2 rifles were brought forth, gleaming barrels polished, stocks dark with oil. The chief took his weapon with reverence, kissing its barrel as if it were a sacred relic. The challenger seized his like a predator clutching prey. The cowboy stood motionless until one of the warriors shoved a rifle toward him. He accepted it without ceremony, his fingers curling around the stock as though it were nothing more than a tool. They faced each other at the center of the ring. Chief, challenger, cowboy. 3 men bound by pride, greed, and fate. The crowd pressed closer, a living wall of anticipation. The woman cried out suddenly, her voice breaking like glass. "Enough! Stop this madness!" But her words were swallowed by the roar of the crowd, by the pounding of feet, and the rising chant that demanded blood. The chief raised his rifle high, signaling the duel would begin at his command. His eyes burned with the fire of a man who had wagered everything. The challenger licked his lips, eager. The cowboy rolled his shoulders, exhaling slowly, every nerve drawn tight. Above them, the hawk shrieked again, its wings cutting across the blazing sky. And, as the sun blazed overhead, shadows shrank to nothing, and the canyon held its breath. The first shot was about to fall. The canyon fell into silence so absolute that even the wind seemed to vanish. The only sound was the creak of leather as the 3 men took their places, rifles heavy in their hands. Dust swirled around their boots, curling upward like ghosts rising from the earth. Chief Nanton stood tall, his chest painted with streaks of black, his eyes wild with the fire of a man who had wagered everything. The challenger, thick-necked and grinning, rolled his shoulders like a bull eager to gore. Between them stood the drifter, the cowboy, his hat shading eyes that betrayed neither fear nor excitement, only the calm of a man who had faced death too many times to flinch now. The drums began again, slow and deliberate, each beat echoing like a heartbeat across stone walls. A warrior stepped forward, voice booming in the Apache tongue, counting the paces. 1, 2, 3. The men began to walk, backs straight, rifles at their sides. 4, 5, 6. Dust rose with every step, clinging to their boots, catching in the light. At 20, the warrior's cry cut the air. The men turned. For a moment, the world seemed to narrow into nothing but the space between them. The crowd held its breath, eyes wide, lips parted, waiting for thunder. The woman strained against her bonds, wrists bleeding, eyes locked on the cowboy. The challenger moved first, rifle jerking upward. The crack split the air, sharp, violent. A puff of dust leapt near the cowboy's boots. The crowd roared, the sound echoing like a storm in the canyon. But the cowboy had not fired. He stood rooted, eyes fixed on Nanton, waiting. The chief lifted his rifle with deliberate precision, every movement measured. His finger curled on the trigger. The cowboy shifted at last, drawing his rifle to his shoulder in a motion so fluid it seemed rehearsed 1,000 times. The woman screamed. 2 shots rang out, nearly together. Smoke curled in the air, acrid and bitter. The challenger staggered backward, clutching his chest, eyes wide with shock. Blood poured between his fingers, dark against the dust. He collapsed with a grunt, the canyon floor shaking as his body struck the earth. Gasps rippled through the crowd. 1 man down. But Nanton still stood, untouched, his rifle aimed square at the cowboy's heart. The drifter's hat flew back, shot clean from his head, the bullet grazing his temple. A thin line of blood trickled down his face, but his eyes remained sharp, locked on the chief. The drums quickened, voices rising into a frenzy. Warriors screamed for blood, some shouting the chief's name, others the stranger's. Children buried their faces into their mothers' skirts, while gamblers howled at their winnings and losses. From his brow lifted his rifle once more, and spoke softly, though the words carried. A lion who wagers his wife is already dead. The insult struck like a knife. Nanton bellowed, firing. The bullet sang past the drifter's ear, shattering stone behind him. The cowboy dropped to one knee, dust exploding around him. His rifle barked in return. The chief spun, staggered, then caught himself, blood staining the paint on his chest. But he did not fall. His roar shook the canyon, and with terrifying strength, he raised his rifle again. The cowboy rose, steady, his breath slow despite the pounding of his heart. He could feel every eye, every prayer, every curse hanging on the pull of his trigger. Time thickened, the world narrowing into the chief's burning eyes. For a heartbeat, both men held their fire, locked in a silent duel deeper than bullets. Then Nanton lunged forward, finger tightening. The woman screamed his name, her voice a blade of grief. The cowboy fired. The sound cracked the sky itself. Smoke enveloped them, swallowing both figures in a gray shroud. The crowd surged forward, warriors shouting, townsfolk shrieking. The drums stopped. When the smoke cleared, Chief Nanton stood swaying, eyes wide, blood pouring from his chest. He dropped his rifle, knees buckling. With one last roar, half fury, half despair, he collapsed face first into the dust. Silence fell. The canyon seemed to breathe again, the sound of wind returning like the sigh of the earth itself. The cowboy lowered his rifle, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the woman. She sagged against her bonds, tears streaming down her face, her lips shaping a wordless prayer. Around them, the crowd remained frozen, caught between awe and terror. Then the chant began, low at first, then swelling. Some shouted in rage, calling for the stranger's death. Others raised their fists in respect. The air trembled with the clash of voices. The cowboy knew it was not over. The chief lay dead, but the tribe's fury had only begun to boil. He turned his back on the body and stepped toward the woman. Each footfall deliberate, each heartbeat heavy with the weight of what was yet to come. The showdown was finished, but the war was just beginning. The canyon was a cauldron of voices, boiling with rage, fear, and awe. Some cried for vengeance, demanding the stranger's blood to pay for the chief's fall. Others murmured in hushed tones, shaken by what they had seen, the pride of their leader shattered by a single bullet. The air vibrated with fury, the dust trembling as if the earth itself shared in the unrest. The cowboy stood in the storm of noise, chest rising and falling, rifle still hot in his hands. He glanced once at the fallen body of Chief Nantan, then turned away. His boots crunched toward the post where the woman remained bound. Each step seemed louder than the shouts, heavier than the drums that had stopped beating. Her eyes lifted to meet his. They were wet with tears, but behind the sorrow glowed something else. Hope, fragile and trembling. "Please," she whispered, her voice nearly lost beneath the crowd's roar. "Cut me free." He raised his knife, the blade catching the sun. In one swift motion, the leather straps fell away. She stumbled forward, collapsing against him, her weight trembling in his arms. For a moment, the chaos around them seemed to fade, the world narrowing to the sound of her ragged breaths and the hammering of his own heart. But the silence didn't last. A warrior broke from the crowd, eyes blazing with vengeance, spear raised high. He lunged. The cowboy twisted, shoving the woman behind him, his revolver flashing from its holster. The shot cracked, the warrior spun, and dust swallowed his body. The crowd erupted, half in fury, half in terror. More warriors surged forward, but a barked command froze them. An elder, his hair white as bone, stepped into the ring. His voice carried above the storm. "Enough!" he thundered. "The chief is dead. More blood will not bring him back." The warriors hesitated, torn between rage and respect. Their spears lowered a fraction, though their eyes never left the drifter. The elder's gaze shifted to the woman. She belongs to the tribe still. Her fate is not his to decide. The cowboy's hand tightened on his revolver. He looked at the woman, then back to the elder. His voice was steady, low enough that only those nearest could hear. "Her fate is her own." The elder's eyes darkened, but he did not argue. Instead, he turned to the people, spreading his arms. "The spirits will judge this day. We are not the ones to finish it." Murmurs swept the crowd. The tension thinned, but did not vanish. Warriors sheathed their blades reluctantly, though hatred simmered in their eyes. The gamblers melted back. The edge of the ring, he paused. His gaze swept the crowd one last time. "I didn't come here for war," he said, voice carrying, sharp as steel. "But if any man here believes her life still belongs to another, he'll have to take it from me." A silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then, slowly, the elder nodded. Not approval, not surrender, merely acknowledgement that the choice had been made. For now. The cowboy swung into the saddle, pulling the woman up behind him. Her arms wrapped weakly around his waist, her face pressed against his back. He touched his hat, a wordless farewell to no one in particular, and spurred the gelding forward. The horse surged, hooves striking sparks from the stone. The crowd parted, grudgingly, like water around a rock. Warriors glared but did not move. The drums remained silent, replaced by the steady thunder of hooves carrying them toward the canyon's mouth. Behind them, the body of Chief Nantan lay still, dust already beginning to cover him. His blood darkened the earth, a stain that would not soon fade. The tribe stood in uneasy silence, torn between vengeance and fear of the stranger who had defied their leader. As the cowboy rode into the blazing horizon, the woman's voice broke the quiet. Barely more than a whisper, but he heard it. "Why did you risk your life for me?" He did not answer at once. The wind tore at his coat, the sun burned his shoulders, and the canyon behind seemed to pulse with memories of blood. Finally, his voice came, low and weary. "Some wagers ain't meant to be played." Her arms tightened around him, silent tears soaking into the dust of his coat. The horse carried them farther, each hoofbeat pounding a rhythm of escape, of defiance, of uncertain freedom. But as they disappeared into the desert, questions hung heavy in the air. Would the tribe pursue? Would the woman ever truly be free of her people's claim? And what place did a drifting cowboy have beside her, hunted by vengeance and bound by fate? The canyon's echoes offered no answer. Only the hawk circling overhead, its cry sharp against the burning sky, as if to remind all who had gathered that blood spilled never truly dries. The choice had been made, but the story was far from over.